The FBI director had been driving for nearly an hour, navigating the busy streets of the city on his way to a meeting that seemed routine but carried its own importance. The morning had started normally, with a cup of coffee and a quick glance at the headlines, nothing unusual at first glance. He was a man who had grown used to authority, someone accustomed to walking into rooms where his presence alone commanded attention. Yet, as he made his way through a particularly crowded intersection, something completely unexpected happened. Red and blue lights flashed in his rearview mirror, reflecting off the polished hood of his car. At first, he thought it was a standard traffic stop, perhaps a minor infraction or a misunderstanding. He slowed down carefully, activating his blinker to signal that he would pull over. But there was something in the way the officers moved as he approached that made his instincts alert. He had seen countless police interactions over the years, some routine, some tense, but this felt different. The officers who approached the car carried themselves with an unusual aggression. The one who reached for the driver's side window did not greet him politely, there was no introduction, no recognition of the official badge displayed on his chest. Instead, the officer leaned in, squinting, as if trying to figure out why someone like him would be driving through that part of the city. The FBI director kept his hands visible on the steering wheel and spoke calmly, giving his name and explaining his position. He expected the standard procedure, acknowledgement, perhaps a quick verification of his credentials, and a polite release. Instead, the officers ignored him. They exchanged quick, murmured words between themselves, their tone sharp and hostile. One officer snapped questions at him in rapid succession, each one more accusatory than the last. "Where are you coming from? Why are you driving through here? Who do you think you are?" The director remained calm, aware that any sign of anger or frustration could escalate an already tense situation. He knew that as an FBI director, he could easily use his authority to resolve this, but he also understood that showing patience and composure might be the smartest way to handle these aggressive officers. The situation quickly escalated, far beyond what the FBI director could have imagined. Within moments, the initial tension had transformed into something more serious. The officers, rather than calming down or following proper procedure, began behaving as if the director were a common criminal. Their tone grew sharper, their movements more forceful, and the air around the car seemed to thicken with hostility. Passers-by on the sidewalk paused, some stopping mid-step, staring at the scene as it unfolded before them. The flashing lights of the police cars reflected off the chrome of nearby vehicles, creating a chaotic yet surreal backdrop. The officers' behavior continued to grow increasingly aggressive, yet the FBI director maintained a composed, steady stance. He could feel the tension building in the air, thick enough to touch. People around them had stopped, staring with wide eyes, their phones recording every moment. Some whispered among themselves, clearly shocked that a man of such high authority could be treated in this way. The director noticed the rising murmurs of the crowd, sensing that public attention might influence the outcome. The tension in the air had reached a breaking point. The officers were beginning to realize that the man standing before them was not ordinary, and that their attempts to intimidate him had failed entirely. The FBI director maintained his calm, measured posture, his eyes scanning each officer carefully while subtly observing the crowd. Every subtle gesture, every whispered word between the officers, and every movement in the audience was noted in his mind. He understood that patience was now his greatest tool, and the balance of power was slowly shifting in his favor. One officer, visibly frustrated and realizing that their aggression was not achieving its intended effect, stepped forward hesitantly. We need to verify your identification. We can't just take your word for it." The director's tone was calm, authoritative, and unyielding. "You are free to verify my identification through official channels," he said clearly. "I am fully cooperating, but I will not tolerate intimidation, harassment, or illegal demands. Let us resolve this properly." The words carried a quiet strength, demonstrating both professionalism and unwavering resolve. The officer glanced at his colleagues, their faces a mixture of confusion, frustration, and growing embarrassment. They had underestimated the director's ability to remain composed under pressure, and now they were beginning to recognize the seriousness of their actions. The crowd around them was tense but quietly supportive, their phones raised, recording the encounter, and their presence adding an invisible but powerful layer of accountability. At this moment, one of the officers tried a different tactic. He attempted to appeal to the director's sense of compromise, suggesting that if he paid a small fine immediately, the situation could be handled quickly. The director's expression did not change, and his voice remained calm and firm. "There is no lawful basis for such a demand," he said. "I will not provide money for an illegitimate or fabricated reason. Any attempt to coerce funds under threat is illegal and will be documented. We can resolve this only through proper legal channels." The officers were now beginning to realize that their tactics had not only failed but were also being witnessed and recorded by an increasing number of bystanders. The realization began to settle in that continuing their aggressive behavior could have serious consequences. The director could feel the subtle shift in their demeanor, their previous aggression softening into hesitation. The crowd, sensing a change in the situation, started murmuring, some offering words of encouragement. "He's standing his ground," one person whispered. Another added, "Finally, someone is handling this the right way." The director remained focused, knowing that public support, even if quiet, created a powerful layer of accountability. He kept his tone calm, measured, and professional, emphasizing cooperation and legality while subtly demonstrating authority. Then, something remarkable happened. The lead officer, recognizing that the director's calm and clear handling of the situation had put them in a difficult position, lowered his voice and attempted to negotiate. "Look, maybe we overstepped," he said, his tone softer than before. "Can we just verify your credentials and move on?" The director nodded slightly, keeping his posture calm but firm. "That would be the correct and lawful approach. Verification should be conducted professionally, and all parties should maintain respect and proper conduct." The other officers exchanged glances, a mixture of relief and shame evident on their faces. Their earlier arrogance and aggression had not only failed but had been publicly exposed. The director observed this subtle transformation carefully, understanding that this was the turning point in the encounter. He allowed them a moment to process the situation while keeping himself fully in control, never showing a sign of anger or frustration. One officer, now noticeably quieter and more cautious, stepped forward with the radio in hand, requesting immediate verification from headquarters. The director remained calm, observing the process without interruption. He knew that patience and composure were critical, and that allowing the officers to verify his identity through proper channels would de-escalate the situation without further conflict. As the verification was conducted, the lead officer began to speak privately to his colleagues, clearly acknowledging that their actions had been inappropriate. Their body language had changed. They were no longer aggressive, no longer attempting to intimidate. The director's calm, confident, and strategic handling of the situation had effectively turned the confrontation into a learning moment for the officers. Finally, the radio crackled, confirming the director's identity. The officers visibly relaxed, some even bowing their heads slightly in acknowledgement. The director spoke once more, his voice steady and professional. "Thank you for verifying my credentials. I appreciate that we are now following proper protocol. Let us all remember that professionalism, respect, and adherence to the law are the best ways to serve and protect the public." His words were measured, leaving a lasting impression on both the officers and the observing crowd. The crowd began to disperse slowly, still murmuring about the remarkable events they had just witnessed. Many had captured the encounter on their phones, sharing videos that would soon circulate widely. The director remained composed, watching the officers as they organized themselves and began to step back. It was clear that they had learned a powerful lesson in humility, professionalism, and the importance of lawful conduct. Even after the verification, the officers offered a formal, if slightly awkward, apology. We are sorry for the way we handled this," the lead officer said. "It was inappropriate. We should have followed proper procedure from the start." The director nodded slightly, his calm demeanor conveying understanding and professionalism. "Acknowledging mistakes is the first step toward improvement," he said. "I hope that going forward, all interactions are conducted respectfully and lawfully." With the situation now fully de-escalated, the director finally allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. He had successfully navigated an extremely tense and potentially dangerous situation with patience, strategic calm, and unwavering professionalism. Every word, every gesture, and every subtle decision had contributed to a successful resolution without any escalation into violence or unlawful behavior. As he walked away from the scene, the crowd's whispers of admiration followed him. People were discussing the encounter in real time, sharing videos and recounting what had happened. It was clear that this incident would be remembered, not just for the initial aggression, but for the remarkable way in which the FBI director had handled it. His calm, confident, and strategic approach had turned a dangerous situation into a demonstration of authority, professionalism, and lawfulness. Even the officers, now reflecting on their actions, seemed to have gained a new perspective. They had been confronted by someone who refused to be intimidated, someone who maintained composure under pressure, and someone who exemplified the principles of law and justice. It was a rare and humbling experience, and they would likely carry the lessons learned from this encounter throughout their careers. By the end of the day, the director had not only ensured his own safety but had also provided a powerful example of how to handle aggression and intimidation with intelligence, patience, and professionalism. The crowd dispersed, the street returned to normal, and the officers were left to reflect on the encounter they would never forget. The director's calm and strategic handling of the situation had turned what could have been a humiliating or dangerous confrontation into a public demonstration of authority, integrity, and professionalism. He had proven that patience, clarity, and composure could overcome intimidation, aggression, and unlawful behavior, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved. In the end, the officers had learned that respect, legality, and proper procedure were not just theoretical concepts, they were essential in every interaction, no matter the circumstances. And the FBI director had walked away, not just unscathed, but with his authority reaffirmed and his reputation strengthened, leaving behind a story that would be retold countless times as an example of courage, composure, and professionalism under pressure. Every second counted, and the atmosphere on the street had grown tense beyond imagination. The FBI director stood calm but alert, observing every subtle movement of the officers around him. They had now started acting in ways that were more than just rude. They were attempting to intimidate him, trying to assert dominance, and even pressing him into actions he had no reason to take. The crowd around them had grown larger, with some people stopping their cars and leaning out of windows to watch. Every eye was on the unfolding drama, and the flashing lights of police vehicles cast an almost surreal glow over the scene. The director knew that the presence of witnesses could work to his advantage, yet he also understood that the officers' frustration might make them unpredictable. The lead officer, clearly irritated by the director's calm demeanor, leaned in closer and spoke in a harsh, condescending tone. "You think you are above us? Just because you have a badge doesn't mean anything here. You will do as we say." The director's expression remained neutral, his voice steady as he responded. "I am not above the law, and I expect the law to be followed correctly. Authority is not demonstrated by intimidation or aggression. I am asking that you follow proper procedures." His words were calm yet firm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced far greater challenges without losing composure. The officer, unwilling to take the subtle warning seriously, began trying to assert control more aggressively. He attempted to block the director's path, raising his hands as if to physically force him into compliance. The director moved slightly to the side, keeping his balance and maintaining a controlled distance. He could see the frustration on the officers' faces growing with every second. Their repeated attempts to provoke a reaction were failing. For every hostile gesture they made, the director remained composed, answering firmly and politely. One officer, younger and visibly impatient, started making personal comments, mocking the director's position. "Do you really think anyone respects you?" he sneered. "You're just a man in a suit pretending to be important." The director, rather than showing anger, took a deep breath and replied evenly, "Respect is earned by actions, not insults. Your words do not diminish my responsibilities or my ability to enforce the law. Let us focus on resolving this situation professionally." His calm response surprised the officer, who had expected anger or fear to emerge. The crowd around them was now whispering among themselves, some recording the events on their phones, others watching silently. The director could sense the silent pressure that the public gaze was creating. Every word the officers spoke, every gesture they made, was being observed, and the presence of witnesses had the power to change the outcome. He realized that this subtle public accountability could influence even the most aggressive officer, as they now had to consider the consequences of their actions beyond just the immediate scene. As the verbal insults continued, the officers took a more aggressive step. They demanded that the director provide something beyond his ID, insisting that they needed confirmation from higher authorities before they could believe his identity. The director nodded calmly. "I am fully prepared to allow verification from any appropriate authority. I am cooperating entirely within the law. Let us handle this matter professionally." His tone was calm, his words clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The officers, frustrated that their intimidation tactics were ineffective, began making more aggressive threats. "If you do not comply, we will take further action," one said, trying to imply that they could detain him until verification was complete. The director's calm eyes scanned each officer carefully. He knew the situation was now precarious, but his years of training had prepared him to navigate even dangerous confrontations. He stepped forward slightly, his voice unwavering. "Any action taken outside lawful procedure will be recorded and addressed. I am not resisting lawful instruction, but I will not consent to intimidation or unlawful treatment." The officers' frustration was becoming more apparent. They began muttering to each other, exchanging quick, sharp words. It was clear they had not expected the director to maintain such a composed stance, especially in the face of open hostility and repeated insults. The director seized the opportunity, speaking with calm authority. "This situation can still be resolved professionally. There is no need for further escalation. Please conduct yourselves according to law and procedure." His words carried weight, and his unwavering calm was beginning to shift the dynamics subtly. Then, in a move that seemed both bold and reckless, one of the officers demanded that the director pay a fine on the spot, claiming some vague violation. The director, taken aback for a brief moment but maintaining composure, responded, "There is no legal basis for such a demand. I will not provide money for an unlawful or fabricated reason. Any attempt to coerce funds under threat of detention is illegal." His words were clear and firm, demonstrating his understanding of the law and his unwillingness to be intimidated. The officer's expression hardened. He clearly did not expect resistance to this level of extortion. Another officer, perhaps sensing that the situation was spinning out of control, hesitated, looking at his colleague with uncertainty. The director noticed the hesitation immediately. He knew that even small moments of doubt could be leveraged to regain control of the interaction. He continued speaking calmly, reinforcing the legal boundaries and the importance of professional conduct. "You have a duty to uphold the law, not to misuse it," he said evenly. "Any attempt to force compliance through threats or intimidation is a violation of both legal standards and professional responsibility. I urge you to reconsider your actions before proceeding further." His voice was calm, but each word carried authority and conviction. The officers, now realizing that their target was not only calm but also knowledgeable and prepared, began to exchange uncertain glances. Meanwhile, the crowd's reaction was growing. More people had stopped to watch, and whispers turned into audible comments. Phones were raised higher to record every second of the confrontation. The director could feel the subtle but growing influence of the witnesses. Their presence created accountability, reminding the officers that their actions were not private and could have consequences far beyond the street where this was happening. The lead officer, now visibly frustrated, attempted to regain control through a combination of threats and authority. "Step aside and comply, or there will be consequences," he said sharply. The director, maintaining his calm posture and steady gaze, responded, "I am fully cooperating with," and understood that patience and strategic calm could be his greatest weapons in this surreal confrontation. The atmosphere on the street had grown tense beyond imagination. The FBI director stood calm but alert, observing every subtle movement of the officers around him. They had now started acting in ways that were more than just rude. They were attempting to intimidate him, trying to assert dominance, and even pressing him into actions he had no reason to take. The crowd around them had grown larger, with some people stopping their cars and leaning out of windows to watch. Every eye was on the unfolding drama, and the flashing lights of police vehicles cast an almost surreal glow over the scene. The director knew that the presence of witnesses could work to his advantage, yet he also understood that the officers' frustration might make them unpredictable. The lead officer, clearly irritated by the director's calm demeanor, leaned in closer and spoke in a harsh, condescending tone. "You think you are above us? Just because you have a badge doesn't mean anything here. You will do as we say." The director's expression remained neutral, his voice steady as he responded. "I am not above the law, and I expect the law to be followed correctly. Authority is not demonstrated by intimidation or aggression. I am asking that you follow proper procedures." His words were calm yet firm, carrying the quiet authority of someone who had faced far greater challenges without losing composure. The officer, unwilling to take the subtle warning seriously, began trying to assert control more aggressively. He attempted to block the director's path, raising his hands as if to physically force him into compliance. The director moved slightly to the side, keeping his balance and maintaining a controlled distance. He could see the frustration on the officers' faces growing with every second. Their repeated attempts to provoke a reaction were failing. For every hostile gesture they made, the director remained composed, answering firmly and politely. One officer, younger and visibly impatient, started making personal comments, mocking the director's position. "Do you really think anyone respects you?" he sneered. "You're just a man in a suit pretending to be important." The director, rather than showing anger, took a deep breath and replied evenly, "Respect is earned by actions, not insults. Your words do not diminish my responsibilities or my ability to enforce the law. Let us focus on resolving this situation professionally." His calm response surprised the officer, who had expected anger or fear to emerge. The crowd around them was now whispering among themselves, some recording the events on their phones, others watching silently. The director could sense the silent pressure that the public gaze was creating. Every word the officers spoke, every gesture they made, was being observed, and the presence of witnesses had the power to change the outcome. He realized that this subtle public accountability could influence even the most aggressive officer, as they now had to consider the consequences of their actions beyond just the immediate scene. As the verbal insults continued, the officers took a more aggressive step. They demanded that the director provide something beyond his ID, insisting that they needed confirmation from higher authorities before they could believe his identity. The director nodded calmly. "I am fully prepared to allow verification from any appropriate authority. I am cooperating entirely within the law. Let us handle this matter professionally." His tone was calm, his words clear, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The officers, frustrated that their intimidation tactics were ineffective, began making more aggressive threats. "If you do not comply, we will take further action," one said, trying to imply that they could detain him until verification was complete. The director's calm eyes scanned each officer carefully. He knew the situation was now precarious, but his years of training had prepared him to navigate even dangerous confrontations. He stepped forward slightly, his voice unwavering. "Any action taken outside lawful procedure will be recorded and addressed. I am not resisting lawful instruction, but I will not consent to intimidation or unlawful treatment." The officers' frustration was becoming more apparent. They began muttering to each other, exchanging quick, sharp words. It was clear they had not expected the director to maintain such a composed stance, especially in the face of open hostility and repeated insults. The director seized the opportunity, speaking with calm authority. "This situation can still be resolved professionally. There is no need for further escalation. Please conduct yourselves according to law and procedure." His words carried weight, and his unwavering calm was beginning to shift the dynamics subtly. Then, in a move that seemed both bold and reckless, one of the officers demanded that the director pay a fine on the spot, claiming some vague violation. The director, taken aback for a brief moment but maintaining composure, responded, "There is no legal basis for such a demand. I will not provide money for an unlawful or fabricated reason. Any attempt to coerce funds under threat of detention is illegal." His words were clear and firm, demonstrating his understanding of the law and his unwillingness to be intimidated. The officer's expression hardened. He clearly did not expect resistance to this level of extortion. Another officer, perhaps sensing that the situation was spinning out of control, hesitated, looking at his colleague with uncertainty. The director noticed the hesitation immediately. He knew that even small moments of doubt could be leveraged to regain control of the interaction. He continued speaking calmly, reinforcing the legal boundaries and the importance of professional conduct. "You have a duty to uphold the law, not to misuse it," he said evenly. "Any attempt to force compliance through threats or intimidation is a violation of both legal standards and professional responsibility. I urge you to reconsider your actions before proceeding further." His voice was calm, but each word carried authority and conviction. The officers, now realizing that their target was not only calm but also knowledgeable and prepared, began to exchange uncertain glances. Meanwhile, the crowd's reaction was growing. More people had stopped to watch, and whispers turned into audible comments. Phones were raised higher to record every second of the confrontation. The director could feel the subtle but growing influence of the witnesses. Their presence created accountability, reminding the officers that their actions were not private and could have consequences far beyond the street where this was happening. The lead officer, now visibly frustrated, attempted to regain control through a combination of threats and authority. "Step aside and comply, or there will be consequences," he said sharply. The director, maintaining his calm posture and steady gaze, responded, "I am fully cooperating with," and the officers, clearly frustrated by the director's calm demeanor, began to escalate further. They demanded that he step aside from the crowd and place his hands on a patrol car. The director complied, moving carefully, but his movements were deliberate and measured, projecting control rather than fear. He knew that any sudden or panicked gesture could be misinterpreted and used against him. His eyes scanned the surrounding area, noting the positions of the officers, the crowd, and the vehicles. He catalogued everything meticulously, ready to respond appropriately if the situation shifted. Despite his cooperation, one officer stepped dangerously close, speaking over him with a sharp, commanding tone. "Do you think your badge makes you untouchable? Everyone has to follow the rules." The director looked directly at him, his calm gaze unwavering. "Respectfully, I am following the rules. I am asking that you follow procedure as well. We can resolve this situation professionally, without escalation." His words were firm but polite, carrying a quiet authority that seemed to momentarily give the officer pause. The officer, not used to being challenged, scoffed but hesitated. It was a small victory for the director, who had learned over decades that even brief moments of hesitation in an opponent could change the trajectory of a tense encounter. He knew he had to maintain this balance, keeping his tone calm and measured while subtly asserting his authority. Every word was deliberate, every pause was calculated to remind the officers that he was not someone to intimidate easily. The crowd's presence became increasingly significant. People were watching, whispering, some speaking words of encouragement. Phones continued recording, capturing the confrontation in detail. The director could feel the silent pressure of public observation. This added a layer of accountability for the officers, who were beginning to realize that their actions were being scrutinized beyond the immediate situation. It was not lost on him that public attention could be a powerful tool, a silent witness to prevent unlawful behavior. Suddenly, one of the younger officers attempted to take the director's arm, trying to force compliance. The director reacted calmly but firmly, stepping back slightly to maintain balance and distance. "Please do not touch me without cause," he said in a low, steady voice. "I am cooperating, but this behavior is unnecessary and inappropriate." His words were precise, leaving no room for misunderstanding, while also asserting a boundary that the officers could not legally cross. The lead officer, sensing that the situation was becoming more visible and that their actions were increasingly questionable, tried a different approach. He began asking for clarification of the director's presence, framing it as an attempt to justify their aggressive stance. The director seized this opportunity to maintain control, answering clearly and calmly. "I am in this area for a scheduled federal meeting. My presence here is lawful and authorized. There is no reason for aggression or unlawful arrest." Even as he spoke, the tension in the air remained thick. The officers were visibly frustrated, muttering to each other, their patience running thin. The director noted every gesture, the tightening of fists, the quick exchanges of whispered words, the glances toward the crowd. Each subtle signal provided information on their state of mind, and he used this knowledge to maintain his calm while subtly guiding the interaction toward resolution. Then, the situation reached a critical point. The officers, unable to assert control through words alone, demanded that the director provide proof beyond his ID. They claimed they needed confirmation from headquarters to believe his credentials. The director, anticipating this possibility, remained calm. "I am prepared to allow verification from your supervisors or any official source. I am cooperating fully within the law. Let us conduct this verification professionally." His tone was unwavering, projecting confidence without arrogance, authority without aggression. The officer, clearly frustrated by the calm defiance, tried to pressure the director further, suggesting that he could be detained for questioning until verification was complete. The director paused for a moment, letting the weight of the absurdity settle in. He had faced challenging situations before, but never in such a surreal, public setting, where a man of his position could be treated as a suspect without cause. Yet he did not react emotionally. Instead, he spoke clearly and firmly, asserting both his rights and the legal boundaries of the officer's authority. "You may verify my identity with any appropriate authority," he said evenly. "I am willing to comply with lawful procedures, but I am not subject to arbitrary detention or intimidation. Your actions right now are inconsistent with proper protocol and law enforcement standards." His words were precise, deliberate, and professional, carrying the weight of his office while appealing to reason and legality. The officers hesitated, their expressions revealing frustration and uncertainty. They had not anticipated such composed resistance, nor had they expected their target to command attention and respect despite the aggression directed at him. The director noted the shift immediately. Even a slight pause in an opponent's aggression could be leveraged to gain control of a volatile situation. He continued speaking calmly, reinforcing his points without raising his voice, projecting authority and confidence. At that moment, the crowd began to react more visibly. Murmurs turned into soft exclamations, whispers into audible expressions of surprise and concern. Phones were raised higher, capturing every detail. The director could feel the subtle influence of the public gaze. It added pressure on the officers to act within the boundaries of law and propriety. He used this awareness strategically, maintaining calm while subtly allowing the officers to realize that their conduct was under scrutiny. The lead officer, sensing the pressure, tried to regain control through verbal intimidation. He raised his voice, issuing commands and attempting to assert dominance through volume. The director did not flinch. Instead, he remained composed, speaking in a steady, clear voice. Authority is not demonstrated by aggression or intimidation. True authority is exercised with respect for law and procedure. I ask that you conduct yourselves professionally, as required by your oath and responsibilities. The effect was immediate. The officer paused, momentarily caught off guard by the calm, authoritative response. He muttered under his breath, clearly struggling to maintain composure. The director continued, reinforcing the legal and procedural boundaries. I am not resisting lawful instruction. I am asking only that you follow proper protocol and respect my rights and position. Any deviation from this is inappropriate and unlawful. Time seemed to stretch. The tension in the air was almost palpable, as if the entire street held its breath. The director remained composed, fully aware of the stakes, fully aware of the public attention, and fully aware of the potential consequences. He had learned through years of experience that remaining calm and strategic in the face of aggression was often the most effective tool for de-escalation. As the officers finally paused, reassessing their approach, the director took a deep breath, continuing to project calm authority. His patience, composure, and strategic focus had created a subtle shift in the dynamics. The officers were no longer entirely in control. The crowd's attention, the director's calm demeanor, and the clear presentation of facts had begun to influence the interaction, tilting the balance subtly but significantly. In that moment, the director realized that the next minutes would be critical. His careful observation, patient responses, and strategic calm had prevented the situation from spiraling out of control. Yet he knew that further escalation was still possible. Every word, every gesture, every subtle move would need to be deliberate, aimed at maintaining control, asserting authority, and ensuring that the encounter remained safe and lawful for all involved. One officer, clearly frustrated by the director's calm demeanor, stepped closer and demanded that he step out of the vehicle. The director did not resist. He opened the car door carefully, his movements deliberate and controlled. He had faced dangerous situations before, but never one in which he was completely powerless to the whims of others who were supposed to enforce the law responsibly. Despite the absurdity of the situation, he maintained a composed expression, knowing that any sign of anger or panic could give the officers an excuse to act recklessly. As he stepped onto the street, the officers surrounded him. Their body language was aggressive, hands resting on their belts near their weapons, eyes narrowed, jaws set tightly. One of the officers, younger and visibly impatient, began mocking him openly, questioning his authority and insulting his position. "Who do you think you are?" the officer sneered. "Just because you have a fancy title doesn't mean you get to bypass the rules like everyone else." The director remained calm, listening carefully, aware that these words were meant to provoke him. He knew that responding emotionally could escalate the situation dangerously. Meanwhile, the crowd had grown larger. People had begun recording on their phones, capturing every detail of the encounter. Some whispered to each other in disbelief, commenting on the irony of the situation. Here was the head of one of the most powerful law enforcement agencies in the country, being treated like a common suspect by a few city police officers. The director noticed the cameras, the faces, the curious eyes, and he understood the importance of every action he took. He could not afford to act rashly. Every gesture, every word, would be watched and remembered. The officers continued their aggressive questioning. They demanded explanations for where he had been, where he was going, and why he was in the area. Their tone was accusatory, as though simply holding a position of power was a crime in itself. The director answered carefully, providing clear information about his meeting and the legitimate reasons for being in that part of the city. He spoke with measured authority, ensuring that his responses were factual and professional. Still, the officers did not relent. Suddenly, one of the officers reached for the director's arm, attempting to physically intimidate him. The director stepped back slightly, maintaining balance and composure. He was trained to handle dangerous physical encounters, and he understood how to assert himself without provoking unnecessary violence. His calm, controlled reaction seemed to surprise the officers, but it did not stop their aggression. They continued to speak over him, their voices raised, their words laced with disrespect. The director realized that this was no longer a simple misunderstanding. The officer's behavior was deliberate, a display of power and prejudice. They were attempting to humiliate him, to undermine his authority publicly. The director could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Every passerby, every recording phone, every whispered comment in the crowd added to the pressure. Yet he did not falter. He drew on his years of experience, relying on the training that had prepared him for high-pressure negotiations, dangerous confrontations, and life-or-death decisions. As the tension mounted, one officer openly questioned his credentials, suggesting they might be fake or exaggerated. The director calmly pulled out his FBI identification and placed it clearly in front of him, ensuring the officers could see it. "These are official credentials," he said steadily. "They confirm my identity and position. I am asking that you follow proper procedure and treat this matter professionally." His voice carried a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with the officer's hostility. Despite the clear display of legitimacy, the officers continued to press him. They mocked his title, laughed at the concept of an FBI director being present in a city street, and questioned why anyone would give him respect. Their words were cutting, meant to provoke frustration and fear. The director, however, maintained his composure, responding with calm and clarity, refusing to allow their behavior to dictate his actions. He understood that losing control, even for a moment, could give them an excuse to escalate the situation further. Time seemed to stretch unnaturally as the confrontation continued. Every second felt like an hour, every movement weighed with importance. The director's mind was sharp, analyzing every gesture, every tone, every expression. He noted the subtle hesitation in one officer's voice, the quick glances exchanged between them, the slight tension in their hands. He knew that they were aware, at some level, that they were in the wrong, yet they persisted in their disrespectful behavior. The officers then demanded that he submit to an arrest, claiming various false charges. The director's eyes widened slightly, though his expression remained calm. He had been arrested before in controlled simulations and training exercises, but never in reality, and certainly never in such an unjust context. The absurdity of the moment was striking. The head of the FBI, a person entrusted with upholding the law across the nation, being accused of crimes without basis. Yet he did not panic. He understood the importance of maintaining composure and dignity in the face of injustice. One officer moved closer, speaking in a tone that suggested he expected immediate compliance. "Step aside. You're under arrest," he said, his words carrying authority that he had no right to wield. The director, still calm, responded clearly and firmly. "I will cooperate as required, but only under proper procedure. I am not subject to arbitrary actions. Your conduct here is unlawful." His words were precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The officers, frustrated by his composure and refusal to submit without reason, began to escalate verbally. They insulted him, making personal comments and questioning his competence. Their behavior was intended to break his resolve, to provoke an emotional reaction that they could use as justification for their actions. The director, however, had anticipated such tactics. As he spoke, the crowd began to notice. People walking on the sidewalk paused, curious about the unusual scene unfolding. Some started recording videos on their phones, sensing that this was not an ordinary traffic stop. The director could feel their eyes on him, a mix of concern and confusion. He felt a sense of disbelief as well, questioning how, in a city where law enforcement was supposed to be professional, such behavior could occur. The officers continued their aggressive questioning, ignoring the badge and credentials in plain sight. One officer leaned closer, his face inches from the director's, and demanded identification again, as if he doubted the authenticity of the documents. The director handed over his ID and FBI credentials without hesitation. He maintained eye contact, speaking clearly and calmly, emphasizing that he was an official representative of the federal government. Still, the officers did not relent. Tension grew with each passing second. The director, though trained for high-pressure situations, felt a wave of frustration mixed with disbelief. He had seen this level of audacity before, but never directed at him personally, and never in such a brazen manner. The officer's behavior was not just unprofessional, it carried undertones of bias, subtle yet unmistakable. The director remained silent for a moment, observing them, noting their body language, their hesitation whenever he mentioned his position. Inside the car, his mind raced with thoughts. He considered the options available to him: insist on immediate verification of his credentials, request backup, or attempt to de-escalate the situation through dialogue. He chose the latter, speaking in measured tones that conveyed both authority and calm. "I understand this may look unusual, but I assure you, I am who I say I am. There is no reason for hostility. Let us handle this professionally." The officer in charge, however, was not interested in professionalism. He continued with a tone that suggested personal judgment rather than official procedure. The director noticed the subtle signs of arrogance, the assumption that someone of his status should bow to their authority regardless of legality or reason. The crowd on the sidewalk grew slightly larger, whispers passing between onlookers about the surprising scene, a man of immense power and influence being treated with open disrespect. Minutes seemed to stretch endlessly. The director could feel the heat rising in his chest, not from anger, but from the sheer absurdity of the moment. He had been trained to remain calm under pressure, to think strategically even in dangerous situations, and now that training was being tested in an unexpected way. He reminded himself that every action, every word, needed to be deliberate. One wrong move could turn a tense but controlled interaction into something far more serious. Then, the questioning shifted from rapid-fire curiosity to outright accusations. The officers implied that he was lying about his position, that he had no right to be in that area, that something must be hidden. The director's mind catalogued every detail: the way the officers avoided looking at his credentials, the subtle gestures suggesting impatience, the murmured comments between them. He remained outwardly calm but internally prepared for escalation. He knew that his next words could make a critical difference. He decided to continue speaking calmly, reinforcing the truth without raising his voice. "I am the FBI director. My credentials are valid. You have no authority to question my position in this manner. Let us resolve this situation without unnecessary escalation." His voice was firm but polite, carrying both the weight of his office and the expectation of proper conduct. By now, the situation had drawn significant attention. Passers-by stopped to watch, their curiosity mixing with concern. Some whispered among themselves, others raised phones to record the unusual encounter. The officers seemed momentarily aware of the growing audience but did not change their demeanor. If anything, their arrogance appeared to strengthen, as though challenging both the director and the onlookers to intervene. The director remained seated, hands visible, maintaining a posture that communicated authority without aggression. He observed the officers carefully, noting every small gesture that might indicate a change in behavior. It was clear that the situation could escalate at any moment, and he had to be prepared for multiple scenarios: further questioning, an unlawful arrest, or even attempts at intimidation. He considered his options carefully, knowing that reacting impulsively could worsen the situation. Time passed slowly, the tension thick in the air. The director's calm presence contrasted sharply with the officer's hostility. He could sense the absurdity growing, the ridiculousness of highly trained law enforcement officers failing to recognize an official representative of the federal government. He knew that history might judge this encounter harshly if it escalated further, and that maintaining composure was crucial for both his safety and the integrity of the institution he represented. As the minutes ticked by, the director continued to speak with quiet authority, calmly correcting misconceptions, reminding the officers of proper procedures, and asserting his rights. He remained patient, even as the officers' impatience grew. His training, experience, and strategic thinking were his allies, guiding him through the surreal and frustrating encounter. Finally, the crowd began to murmur, sensing the tension and the obvious imbalance of power. The director could feel the weight of the moment, the importance of handling it correctly, and the potential consequences if it were not resolved. He continued to maintain his composure, demonstrating a calm strength that contrasted with the officer's aggressive behavior. It was a quiet battle of wills, one that would soon escalate even further. By the time the first 6 minutes had passed, the director was prepared for whatever came next. He had assessed the situation, maintained his dignity, and observed every action and reaction. Though the stop had started as routine, or what should have been routine, it had transformed into a high-stakes interaction, testing both authority and courage. He knew that the coming moments would demand both strategy and restraint, and he was ready to face them with calm determination. Even as the tension lingered, the director's mind remained clear. He focused on maintaining control, understanding the dynamics at play, and preparing for the next phase of the encounter. He had never imagined that a simple drive through the city could turn into such a bizarre and tense confrontation. And yet, here he was, facing officers who had overstepped every protocol, challenging authority and testing patience. Through it all, the director remained calm, composed, and strategic, aware that every word and every gesture mattered. He had encountered dangerous situations before, but this was different. This was not about criminals or national security threats, this was about bias, arrogance, and the misuse of power. He knew that staying calm and measured was the key to navigating this surreal moment, and he was determined not to let the situation spiral out of control.